Welcome to the Youth Sport Podcast. My name is Rihanna Poskin, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly within youth sport. It feels great when a kid comes up to you and says, "Coach, because of you, my life changed in the best way." It would feel awful to hear that because of you, the coach, a kid doesn't want to have anything to do with it ever again. I believe that kids deserve to have fun, to learn, to grow, to compete, and to play in a great environment. Join me as I interview guests that spill the tea on youth sport in order to help you make an enormous impact with kids right now. This episode of the Youth Sport Podcast is brought to you by Lululemon. I am part of the Lululemon Collective and will receive commissions when you shop through my link. Buying something for you or your loved ones, like my favorite warm down joggers, helps me to continue to bring interesting and empowering conversations for everyone. I have to tell you, when I'm coaching, I want to make sure that I'm dressed appropriately, I'm comfortable, my clothes stand up to all kinds of random situations, and that I have pockets. You never know who's going to ask you to hold something for them or what random things you need to carry with you. The Lululemon warm down joggers take care of all of my needs. I invite you to find your go-to item by browsing through the entire Lululemon site. You won't be disappointed. Please use the link provided in the video description below to start shopping. Welcome to another episode of the Youth Sport Podcast. I am pumped today. I have John Coleman with me. John is a mental performance consultant specializing in opening pathways to personal evolution and high performance. He has over 15 years of experience supporting athletes, business professionals, and healthcare practitioners unleash their dormant potential. John has been a lead mental performance consultant for a number of Canadian Olympic and Paralympic programs. With a doctorate in performance psychology, a designation as a registered therapeutic counselor, and connections with various spiritual traditions, John has cultivated a unique skill set. He has an expanded vision for his clients and his progressive and relevant contributions to the field of human performance enhancement, and they are internationally sought after. So before we get started, I just wanted to tell a quick story because you're my brother and I have all this background info on you. Don't worry, I'm not going to embarrass you though.
Unleash the real bio.
The real bio from the 7-year-old that I knew. Okay, so you're probably sick of hearing me tell this story, but considering you're my big brother and I got to teach you something, I feel like somehow maybe I gave back to you considering how much I've learned from you. So way back when I was invited to go skiing with my friend, and I was probably about 11 or 12. I had never skied before and I didn't have any equipment. So my friend was very gracious and she was great. She taught me a lot to the point where eventually I could keep up with her on the ski hill, and we had a blast singing cheesy songs on the chairlift and skiing, night skiing, which is so fun under the lights. And so eventually I just got into a good rhythm where skiing was super, super fun. And then maybe about the next ski season came around and our mom said, "Okay, everybody, let's go skiing together." And so she probably grabbed the younger siblings and you joined me on the bunny hill. And I was pumped. I was like, "Oh, I can finally teach him something." And unfortunately, but fortunately, you're just such a good athlete that by the second or third time we went down, you're like, I got this. And then you were off skiing on the black diamonds for pretty much the rest of the day. And I can probably say that I've never been able to keep up with you since, which is a good thing. It's all a good thing. And so what I would like to kind of move into is just this ability that you've always had to take risk, to, take in pieces of information, to kind of hone it as your own. And then all of a sudden just be like, okay, life is pretty incredible. And there's so many fun things that we can do with it. And that risk part has developed into what you're doing now as an adult. So I would love to channel into that, where you can still be focused, you can still be grounded, you can still be safe, but you can enter into this world of risk. And so part of what I want to know, because I'm raising kids now, And I feel like my heart is on my sleeve a lot of the time because I see what they want to do and I don't know if I can handle it internally because I just see all of the knives that pop up all over the place and the sharp rocks and all of the rest of it. And so you're such a cool person in so many ways, and I really look up to you as a sibling, and you're going to be able to offer so much to everybody. So let's start this off, just kind of giving a foundation of what we'll talk about. So main thing would be risk, mental performance in
Mm,
order to have success in physical performance.
mm,
And so right from the get-go, from a young age, you were really true to who you are, and you proved it by leaving hockey. And so just a quick story about that. What happened in hockey and why did you end up saying, this isn't for me? I'm going to find the ski hills and live in a van.
Well, first of all, thank you for teaching me how to ski again. So,
Well,
so
we'll put that in quotations because I think you would have figured it out on your own anyway.
hey, good teachers are good teachers. I love it. And that's one thing for sure with like high level. I've been just so blessed with amazing teachers throughout my life. And that's for sure a huge element of what's contributed to what I've learned and experienced. And with hockey, I loved the movement piece of it. I love the skill of it. I love the creativity of it. So like road hockey and pond hockey and those were my jam. I really loved that the
Yeah.
most from the skill level. And I also loved competing. And I loved the the sharing of that skill experience in competition. And I always saw it more as this performance of both teams like working together in a way just to show how skilled we are collectively. And I mean, looking back at it now, I'm sure when I was 7 I didn't think of it as that, and I didn't think it was like we're not competing against each other. And so that was what I loved about hockey. And really the thing that happened for me was that I recognized, I guess to you saying like true to myself, going through puberty and those big life changes, I recognized that there were some values that I held to myself that weren't being supported in the hockey community at the junior level. So the one key moment where it really changed for me was I was at a tryout for a junior team, and we're having this scrimmage between the players trying out. The actual coaches were in the stands watching, taking notes, discussing. And so existing players on the team were coaching the bench.
Okay.
And so it was the middle of the scrimmage, and the player coach from the other team came over and tapped me on the helmet, and he said, "Okay, next shift you're going to fight number 5 from the other team." And I looked at him and was like, "What? Why? Has he got beef with me? Like, did something happen?" And and he's like, "No, you just got to fight." And I was like, "Why do I have to fight?" And he's like, "Well, how do you expect to make the team?" And I said to him, I was planning on scoring goals, getting some assists, making some plays, showing my skill. And he
Right.
goes, "Good luck with that." And then like walked back to the other bench. And I was rattled for a moment, like, oh man. And then we get on the ice and number 5 comes up, and number 5 says to me, he's like, we're supposed to fight. And I look at him like, man, I'm not fighting you. And like, if you want to chase me around the rink and try and fight me, you can, but you're gonna look like an idiot, and I'm not gonna fight you. And um, so yeah, so then the game went on, and I didn't fight anyone. I'm not a fighter. That's just not my
Yeah.
my style. And I know that is part of the game, and I understand how it's been part of the history of the game and all those things. But at that time, it felt like it was really being forced upon me.
Okay.
And I just felt like this isn't me. This isn't who I want to become either. Like, I don't want to, this is not the environment I want to be nurtured into.
Yeah.
And I have no idea if it was like the actual coaches who were like, yeah, make sure, like, we want to see that Coleman kid fight,
Uh-huh.
or if it was just I have no idea, but it's just like pretty clear to me. I was like, I'm done with this. This is not where I want to go. And
Yeah.
then it totally switched then to, yeah, mountain biking and skiing. And so what this thread of myself and a sense of wonder and curiosity of my skill. What can I do? What can I explore? really literally opened up to way bigger spaces like mountains and the ocean. And
Right.
so there was a container in, and continues to exist today, a container in those movement activities that is so expansive. And I'll never fully feel and experience I'll experience my limits and be like, okay, here's my current limits, and then develop some skills and expand and experience something different. But there's no, within the structure of them, it's so free. There
Right.
isn't these limits, so I can be myself and learn and discover myself more in that. So that's what happened with hockey, and it really
Yeah.
did open up into these other experiences.
Yeah, and it's really reactionary too, because a lot of what you're talking about with the ocean is spontaneous.
Yeah.
So I remember surfing with you, and how cool was it whenever we'd go down to the water and, some days there'd be jellyfish in the water and they'd be like, you can't go over there because you're going to get stung. And then
Mhm.
other days it'd be like, you're cruising and you're on this glassy surface and all of a sudden a turtle pops up beside you. So here you are in the middle of something that's physical, and also like you have a spiritual component to who you are. And it's just really magical to find these pieces of movement and therapeutic ways to connect. And so I think, yeah, it's really, really incredible. And I loved what you said about the two teams working together. So again, this piece of sport that maybe we don't recognize. And it just came up in a previous podcast episode where a lot of times we look at the other team and we have this hatred towards them and
Right.
we want to just like kill them and destroy them.
Right.
And this actually just happened. I was just talking to Mike about this with the World Junior Tournament. So the Canadians just played the US in the
Yeah.
final game, and the US were criticized for having this garbage pail in their pictures with the Canadian name on it, basically, saying like Canada's garbage.
Hmm.
And their response was that we had this in the dressing room. This is what fuels the team. This is how we get motivated to go out and play. And it's really interesting to think that that is part of it. Like, do we have to really create this sense of hatred in order to perform well? And I would love your intake on that. Maybe we can jump into that before we go into more of your story, because you're the performance guy. So do we have to hate people in order to perform well?
For me, that comes into motivation, right? What does someone need to be motivated, and what does that motivation do to unleash your skill level, to unleash your abilities, and maybe step into doing something you've never done before, so surpass your abilities in the moment, in the spontaneous experience of movement. And going back to hockey and going through various coaches, I never did well with the coach that was trying to hype us up, whether pump our tires and just build the energy, or, yeah, like, we hate this team, like, we need to get them, we need to kill them. Like, and even in some of the competitive, even in like action sports, people talk about like killing it, and, like killing them out, like this narrative around it has never just worked for me. And I know it works for some, because they, for whatever reason, that brings up that motivation, brings up their energy, whatever. But for me, I always saw it as actually a coming from fear, from those coaches especially, where it's like, I don't think you actually trust our abilities enough that
Interesting.
that you can be calm and composed, like a Phil Jackson, who I don't know at all, but would love to,
Uh-huh.
as a coach, where this quiet, composed confidence, I feel like it comes from confidence. And that's more of my style anyways, where I don't get hyped up myself. I stay calm and composed. And when I was competing in free skiing, I had CC written on my gloves and on the end of my poles, and it meant for calm confidence. And that's the last thing I would see before training, before dropping into a run. And with the work I do with professional athletes, that is one of my, and this is my approach. Other people believe differently, and that's fine. But my approach with that is, so one of the teams I work with is a Canadian national biathlon team. And I said to them, like, a perfect day for me is everybody PBs, like, in the whole world. Everybody has the best race they've ever had. And
Okay.
whatever that means for them, because this is a thing, we're all different. So that's going to mean different things for different people. You're still going to have a first place through 80th place. And it might be a heck of a lot closer, which would be exciting. It is also already extremely exciting. That sport's amazing. And but for me, it's not like I never wanted to wish that another team wouldn't show up or another person wouldn't show up. Like, it's like, man, I really hope they suck today so that we
Right.
can just win.
Right.
Because again, then it comes down to the whole thing here of process and enjoying the process and the experience versus just the outcome, right?
Yeah.
If someone just handed you an Olympic gold medal and it's like, here, you won gold, and you literally don't go to the Olympics, you literally don't compete, it's going to have way less meaning. It's going to be a chunk
Yeah.
of metal, right? Versus the experience to get there. So
Yeah.
my personal opinion, no, we don't need to hate anyone to engage in really high level competition. Like, I'm not saying there's no competition and we need to just be participatory and hold hands and
Right.
kumbaya. I mean, it can still be this amazing, exciting, uncertain, dance that it's like a battle dance. There's still this, it's still a battle of your abilities and what you bring to that moment. And for me, it's just less combative. It's less like,
Right.
I'm going to take you down, take you out, annihilate you in the process of me trying to prove my abilities or discover myself in this. And so that's my personal opinion on that. It's a hard no for me. We don't need to hate anyone to
Yeah.
be a high performer. And I literally mean like Olympic gold medalists, Paralympic gold medalists, like winning at the highest level. I really don't feel you need. I mean, I know that from people who don't have that
Right.
mindset and have won those things.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't feel good to completely annihilate the other team, like their best player, make them injured, have them sent off to the hospital, and then you win, by a couple extra goals because they're their best players. And like that's not going to give you the satisfaction of actually, that's not winning. That's just, taking the easy way out. So again, like what you said, there's some really cool research on raising kids. And so just a quick example that I read was if a little tiny kid can't get to the monkey bars because they're just too short, by
Mm-hmm.
you lifting them up and putting them up onto the monkey bars, it doesn't really give them the satisfaction of actually accomplishing that task on their own.
Right.
And when eventually they're able to climb up onto that platform that gets them a little bit higher, and then they can jump up and they can reach it, and then they can go across on their own, that's when they can actually figure out the risk for one, because they can
Mm-hmm.
look at it and be like, do I actually want to do this? And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at a kid who's kind of like, well, I'm a little bit nervous, maybe I'm not going to do that, mom, then they're going to make that choice for themselves. But if mom comes along and just says, oh, here, no, it's okay, I'll just hold you and we'll just, put you across, then they've never actually gone through those steps of risk assessment. And then
Mm-hmm.
the validation of actually accomplishing the task on their own never actually comes through because they didn't really do it themselves.
Right.
So it's interesting that you bring that up as well. Even with the high performance, it's the process. It's, like all those small wins along the way in order to find that success and have that personal best.
Yeah.
So let's go back to your story a little bit because I really want to know how you learned kind of on the fly. So after hockey, you took off, you lived in a van with your buddy,
Mm-hmm.
took some time off from school, and you guys traveled all over North America, hitting ski hill to ski hill and whatever was in between. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that involves some crazy risks. So the van was not that great. It was getting you guys around, but I'm sure that was sketchy for sure.
Best
And
$800 we ever spent.
yeah.
$800 cash for a used van. When I bought that van, quick story before that. I mean, we
Yeah,
could spend
yeah.
hours of just talking about that. I asked the guy, is this going to get us to California? And he's like, you'll be lucky if it gets you out of Ontario.
Okay. But it did, and you kept it going.
Yeah.
But you guys had some sketchy drives for sure. Like, were there times where you guys were even in dangerous situations on the drive?
Oh my God. The very first, so we drove pretty much straight from our hometown, from Whitby to Denver, Colorado. And then we started to go up Berthoud Pass. And we knew very little about vehicle. Like Dave knew a lot more, thank
Okay, put
God.
some perspective here too. How old are you?
18.
Okay.
Yeah, 18. Yeah, year 99, 2000, amazing snow season. It was crazy. It just snowed everywhere so much. It was so amazing. So yeah, so we sleep at kind of the base of this pass, and this pass is the Continental Divide, and the top is, I mean, the top of the mountains right there is like, I think it's just shy of 14,000 feet. It's up there. And the next day we start try and drive up, and we're naive, and we're just like, this is amazing. This is the first day. We just drove across the prairies, and now we're in the mountains. Here we go. And the van's like, but like barely making up. We're like, what is going on? And slowly, we keep making gains. And the lineup of cars coming from Denver that are all like 4-wheel drive, they know what they're doing. It's just getting longer and longer behind us. I'm driving, I'm getting nervous that now we're holding up all these people, but I'm more nervous that it's just going to stop at any moment. And there was a point where Dave said to me, he's like, I think you need to like carry as much momentum around this corner. Otherwise, I think we are going to stop. And then who knows? And we did, and we make it to the top, and we ski all day. And that first day of even just our exploration was amazing, because we're 18, we're in shape, training for this thing, and we're linking together turns. And then we're like, what is going on? Like, we're out of breath. And we're like, oh yeah, right, altitude, and like a decent amount of altitude. And we stayed up in Berthoud Pass for a couple of days, hiking, skiing up there. And then we got back down, and we stayed up pretty long, because we're like, we don't know if the van's going to work. Like, is this our trip? Like, is our trip like a 3-day trip? And oh, actually, that's not true. We went down to Cal in Penn first to see Ballin, and who was on your podcast earlier. Oh man, all the
Yeah.
memories going back.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so we get down, and we call this mechanic, and he comes up, and he's like an angel. He is like our trip angel. And he looks at it, he's like, the governor's just off, because this is not fuel injected, and the altitude. He just like in 5 minutes taught us so much. And he showed us that something very simple that we needed to do. And every time we went to a mountain pass, we needed to change this part of the engine.
Okay.
And by the end of it, we had notches on this part of the engine, and we could take the doghouse, it was called, while we're driving, we can open that up and look at the engine in the
Oh
van,
my God.
loosen this one part, and we had notches for these different altitudes. And then we just push it over, and you'd literally hear the engine just go as it got ready for the pass. So Dave would look at the maps. He's amazing at maps and direction, all these things. He's looking at the maps. He's like, okay, we got this thing coming up, and so in X kilometers, we're going to change the engine. And it was brilliant. And it, no problems with that for the rest of the trip, for the rest of the time we're on the road, and all these drives. And so
Yeah, because this is a
that,
time where there's no cell phone, so you can't just look at the blue dot on the map and figure out where you're going. You're
no,
pulling out a paper map.
exactly. Paper maps, the triptych, it was great. But the sketchiest drive was going to Jackson Hole in Wyoming. And we drove, and the other thing is, we put ourselves in these positions, talking about risk and everything, was like, we would go snow hunting. So we'd be in a place, and then we're like, oh, that place is getting hammered with snow. And we're like, well, obviously we need to go there, which meant a lot of night drives and a lot of storm drives.
Okay.
And the van's rear wheel drive, we've got good tires on it, which is great, but like, it's not the best vehicle for those conditions. And this
Yeah.
drive to Jackson, it was pretty quiet between Dave and I. And the thing we said the most, I'd be like, is that ice? And he'd say, no. Is that ice? No. Is that ice? Nope. And we get to Jackson, he's like, the whole thing was ice. I'm like, I know. And we were just trying to convince ourselves it wasn't, but it was like hours of driving on pure ice. And those are the risks that, when I look back now, and even now, winter driving and things, it's like, that's where I feel sketchier than like being in the mountain with avalanches. And the variables for me are in a way less predictable with some of those things. So the driving part definitely was one of the biggest elements of, I would say, danger of that trip. Yeah, being in the mountains, yeah, avalanches, things like that, but that's a bit of a different story.
Yeah. And so along the way, with you being a young person, you met all kinds of amazing people in all of these different spots.
Mhm.
And we'll go to a serious kind of bit, if you don't mind, if you're comfortable talking. You've actually lost people doing these risky events, which or
Mhm.
activities, whatever
Mhm.
you could call them. Um, and I think that's something that we need to factor into what these sports have. So even if you're looking at the Red Bull mountain biking
Mhm.
competitions, you see these guys and girls taking these huge risks. If they fall off the wrong turn, or if they slide out the wrong way, that could be their life, right?
Yeah.
So if you could maybe talk about the experience that it was like to lose somebody that was close to you, that was doing something that you love, and how you learned from it.
Mhm. Yeah, great question. Very important topic. And I guess I'll start with for me, it's like not necessarily risk reward ratio, but like risk skill
Okay.
ratio. And by skill, that includes experience and education and lots of things. So we can unpack that a little bit later.
Yeah.
In terms of people dying doing things that they love, and that's a big part of it, that they definitely, the people, that the friends that I've had that have lost, I think they love it and they were there because they love it. And so that factors in pretty big of what that experience is like. Losing a friend in that experience is horrible. It's so hard. And in terms of the actual experiences, some of it's a slip,
Yeah.
literally a slip of a foot. You know, you're walking down the sidewalk, and if you slip, I mean, guess you could slip on ice and crack your head and, you know, have some really bad situation. But most of our lives, if we have a slip, it's not so bad. But these situations, sometimes that's, for me, it's been some of the biggest draw, like walking across a knife edge in a mountain, snowing like crazy, and it demands that focus. It demands that state of presence. And Eckhart Tolle unpacks that a lot in his book, The Power of Now, and how that exact reason can make some of those human activities addictive,
Mm.
because it's actually the state of presence that is so addictive, that feels so good, that you're so connected with yourself. And in that instance, beyond yourself, you're connected with this mountain or this storm. And I absolutely love those moments where you're so honed in, where that step is your whole life. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing else there. And so you have friends that they stepped and slipped and then slid down a mountain and died.
Mm.
So it is a bit of a tricky conversation in the sense of outside judgment on someone,
Yep.
where it's like, oh, that person put them in that spot and they died, and that was a dumb idea or wasn't worth it or whatever. And it's like, I don't know, was it? Like, I can't say, can't ask them, they're dead. And but then that connection of bigger philosophical questions really opens up to like, excuse me, like, what's important to you in life?
Yep.
What is life? What is a fulfilled life? And is just endurance a good life? Is living longer, is that what really creates this idea of a good life? The quality over quantity, the process versus the outcome, all these things come in. And personally, and with the community of friends I have, these environments, these natural environments that are so powerful, this is the thing. It's like this connection with something is way, way, way more powerful. Like, to learn humility, to learn respect,
Mm-hmm.
go to a mountain, go to the ocean. And I don't mean you have to go to the top of Everest or go to Jaws and, you know, surfing, things like that. Just being in nature, in a city even, there's a different connection there that is expansive. And yeah, definitely the spectrum of risk. And for sure, people that I work with who are these professional athletes in action sports, people in the community, that is a huge component of it, of recognizing like we're stepping into something that we are not in charge.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I listened to Dak Shepard. He was interviewing a guest, and I don't remember his name. He was an extreme dirt biker.
Mm.
And he said, laying in the hospital bed after bailing and having a huge fall and potentially never being able to walk again, he was sitting there looking up at the ceiling going, how could I have done that better? What will I do next time in order to land that jump? So, what you're saying is very valid. It's kind of like, well, will I spend my whole life sitting on the couch for 90 years? And will I be able to call that my quality of life because I never got hurt? I never went anywhere, but I lived for 90 years.
Right.
Or do you have this life where you are present and engaged and connected and all the rest of it, and you had that fulfillment of a different kind of quality of life? So it is really tricky. And I think what will be interesting on this episode for coaches or for parents and for even athletes is, how can we respect when that's instilled in the person's being? And I think Eckhart Tolle talks quite a bit about that. It's not about I am this or I am that. It's just I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so recognizing that we don't have to identify ourselves with anything, but being present is a huge component of I am. And
Right.
so for a lot of what maybe you can press upon, what I'm actually having a really hard time with is how can I allow my children to be who they are, even though that might involve taking on risk.
Yeah, it will involve taking on risk, not might. As a parent, as you know, we've got a 4.5-year-old little dude, and one of the things I've quickly learned about being a parent, I view a lot of my parenting as being a spotter in a gym,
Okay, yeah, for sure. I'm
right?
like looking for everything.
Yeah, right. And he's going to do the heavy lifting. And I'll be here if he can't lift it anymore, and if he needs a spot, and if he's, kind of in trouble. So
Right.
Finn's loving biking, and he's, again, the risk skill ratio. He doesn't have the awareness of the risk part yet because of his age,
Mhm.
and that's, a part of our development. He's learning it through falls and things like that. And I think it's my job in that situation to, in a way, create an environment where those falls are within a realm where, yeah, he'll probably get hurt, probably get scraped, probably all these things. But the chances of him creating enough speed or enough impact or whatever that he would die from it, going real big,
Yeah.
are very, very, very limited, right? And
Mhm.
so there's some paths around us, and my wife and I have had those conversations, like, hey, what path and this and that. And he just learned he wanted to go over this one curb, and he'd never gone over a curb, but he had such confidence. We were going around the little parking lot thing, and he's like, Daddy, I want to go over that curb. I'm like, great. And as we were biking over and around to it, he just went straight to it. And like 20 feet before, I was like, so have you done this before? Because the way he was approaching it, I thought he had done it with Siri.
Uh-huh.
And he he just quickly said, nope. And I was like, oh, okay. So now all of a sudden, like, he's launching himself into the unknown, which is one of my favorite things.
Uh-huh.
And he's doing it with confidence, also my favorite things.
Yeah.
And he's doing it with this like naivety, which is kind of fun at times. And I'm like, what's going to happen? Maybe he doesn't technically do it right. His handlebars turn. He eats it. He gets a little cut up, whatever. And so my mind, that quick risk assessment was like, okay, fine, go for it.
Yeah.
And all I said to him was, he said the other day when he was biking, he had this like self-talk that he was doing, which is so cool that he was spontaneously doing. And I asked him later what it was, and it was dasha dasha go straight. And I asked him, like, what are you doing with that? And he said, I'm just reminding myself. We were on a path that was kind of narrow. He's like, reminding myself to stay in the middle of the path.
And have you guys said that before?
Never.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Never. No, that was his little brain coming up with it.
Yeah.
And so all I said was, like, dasha dasha go straight. Because straight was going to be better than going on an angle and na. And he
Yeah.
did it, and he just like went plunk plunk. And so he went plunk plunk, and he did it well. And so now we've got plunk plunk. And so now
Okay.
he's going off of bigger things, but he's got this little skill set that he's developing. And I'm trying to learn his language around it. So the other day he was going off something bigger, and all I said was plunk plunk. And and so he did. He goes plunk plunk. And so that's part of what, with parenting for me, again, in my opinion, everyone has their own. This is the thing, like, your understanding of what risk is going to be different than mine, is going to be different than someone else's. And the context, like, I'm super rigid around roads and crossing the road, and like now he's on his bike, and like every single time you're going to get off your bike and we're going to wait and look, all these things.
Yeah.
Because what are the consequences? Especially where we live, there's this one corner, people come around the corner quickly.
Yeah.
It's like you get run over by a car because we didn't teach you how to cross the road. No, that's dumb.
Right. Right.
You scrape your elbow because you want to learn how to skateboard, or you want to learn how to bike, or you fall off the monkey bars, like those sorts of things. Okay, that's a bit of a different story for me.
Yeah. So plunk plunk came into my life recently, and and it was exactly the same scenario, but with my older kid who's older than your kid, and the height was higher, and I'm
Yep.
just like, okay, so the physics behind this
Yep.
is not is not gonna, end very well if he doesn't have the right speed. And sure enough, he didn't, and he went plunk plunk over his handlebars and on the ground. And
Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, here we go.
middle of a pandemic. We have to go to the emergency room and we have to make sure that his arm isn't broken or he's not impaled by his handlebars and all the rest of it. And I was trying to just kind of sit back because same thing, he went at it with this confidence and this, like kind of ego to him. And I was like, I got this, I'm okay with this. And I was kind of like,
Mhm.
yeah, well, maybe have you done it before? Same thing.
Mhm.
It's like, nope,
Mhm.
haven't done this before. Then he's laying there on the ground and I just didn't really say much. I made sure that he was okay. I'm close
Mhm.
by and just kind of letting
Mhm.
him breathe and come to again. And sometimes you don't have to say anything because
No.
they know that that was dumb, just like what you said. And, like there's certain things where it's just like, yeah, that's just a bad decision. And so that skill piece comes into it.
But before we get too far into this, I do want to comment on what you said about giving space
Okay, sure.
for like your son when he fell.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important in just healing in general. And the way, so with the body mind therapy approach as a therapist, that element, as for anyone, especially with young people, if it's very, very serious, like they need to go to the hospital right away and you need to act right away, that's one thing. But if there's this moment where even if it is like a broken bone, and like broken bones are serious but not like super, super serious,
Right.
to give space, because our nervous system right away, like you mentioned, that athlete who was in the hospital, how could I do that? How could I have done that better? We do that naturally as
Yeah.
animals. And so when you're on the ground and that's happening, your nervous system is like, am I still safe? Is probably the first thing our nervous system is saying. Am I still safe? Because I wasn't safe a second ago. I fell, I had an accident. And emotionally, physically, neurologically, you're assessing that. And when, especially when parents jump in and say, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay,
Right. Right.
that gets in the way of our natural ability to make that assessment of, am I okay? Because now I have this authority figure, a parent or a teacher or someone saying I'm okay, but I don't actually know if I'm okay. You're like, hold on, man, I haven't done my own assessment yet if I'm okay. I'll tell you if I'm okay or not.
Right. Yeah.
And then with little ones, especially asking, like, if they're upset by it, if they're crying, and to say, are you hurt physically? Like, are you in pain physically, or are you scared?
Hmm.
And so the emotional, physical connection with that. And then when you give space for little ones to do that, especially if it's a little bump, a little scrape, a little cut, like it's not so bad, they will on their own learn how to recover from a trauma. They will learn how to make their assessment, and they'll learn, period.
Hmm.
There will be that learning. And then, yes, of course, that support of a parent or a sibling or an adult or whatever to then be there. And that is actually critical for just our development as people, so that when you're an adult, you can make those assessments on your own as well.
Hmm.
So that is something that I feel is so important. Again, like the spotting aspect, where you're there to spot, there's going to be bumps and bruises and crashes, and that's part of the learning. That's
Yeah.
not a fail, right? That's not like you did something wrong necessarily. You just didn't do it right skill wise. In terms of your example of your son, there's an element of like, what could I have done differently?
Yeah.
And there's chances are there's some skill set that could have improved that situation. It could have been go faster. He maybe
Right.
needed more speed. Maybe there's a technical thing on the bike, but lying there on the ground, there is that moment of that assessment. Am I okay? And you're like, I'm sore, but I'm okay. And then a couple more minutes of like, what just happened? And then stand up, and then that piece. So I would highly recommend to people, this is definitely more my professional opinion and
Okay.
personal, they're aligned, of giving space
Yeah.
so
And
that the
so
individual can learn.
do you suggest getting back on the horse again right away?
As often as possible, for sure.
Yeah.
Last night we were at we were in a situation where a dog, something happened and a dog barked, thankfully didn't bite our son, but like there was this commotion, and our son was definitely upset by it and visibly upset by it.
Hmm.
And the dog was also, it was clear it was an accident, not an accident, but it's just like this reaction, and they both like, "Wah," and
Right.
there was no biting or anything. And right away our son was like, I want to leave, I want to leave. And we stayed with him and gave space
Hmm.
for exactly what I'm talking about, this assessment of how am I doing. And in both of our minds, my wife and I minds, like, it will be very important to quote unquote get back on the horse again by at least getting closer to the dog. And because the dog wasn't vicious, it wasn't like still trying to get after him or anything. The dog was like tail between its legs, ears were down. It's kind of like, I know I made an error.
Right.
And so we stayed long enough to make sure that connection was still there with the animal, because we don't want him to be afraid of dogs, in general.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that little trauma it's a nucleus could stay for his whole life or for a long time until he actually addresses it. So we were like, let's stay with it long enough he can address it.
Yeah.
The other day he fell biking, and it was a pretty big crash, that one, and big enough I was like, oh crap, like how are you doing? And we stayed in that spot for a while. And there's certain traditions that also believe that when you fall and there's a big impact, part of you could stay in that physical space. And this gets into a whole other realm of anatomy that we talk about, of like our subtle bodies and things like that. And
Okay.
So we stayed, and then actually Finn on his own. And if you notice, a lot of kids will do this. They'll go to the spot where they hit and they'll touch that spot.
Oh, okay.
And naturally, again, it's not like they've learned this from someone just in that moment saying, hey, go do that. Although that's something we do, is I go touch a spot to make a reconnection. Also with that spot, it's like that spot isn't dangerous. It's not like that
Right.
bit of dirt on the path is like malicious. It's
Right. Yeah.
it's dirt. So touch it to make a connection. And depending on your beliefs and how open-minded you are about our anatomy and who we are as creatures and all those things. And I mean, I've seen this working with people recovering from car accidents. So part of more of my clinical professional experience, where part of that recovering from head injury especially is a recovery of the energy that was still at the car accident. And there's so many different techniques of supporting people to go into that space. And this isn't, like, this is just creating the space. And I'm amazed at how many times creating a space of relaxation for sure is the number one thing, where through different relaxation techniques, inviting someone, because what is relaxation? It's safety. So now I feel safe. And this is very similar actually to giving a kid space after they just crashed, giving an adult who's just had a severe car accident and has these symptoms space to reorganize on their own. And they need that relaxation to reorganize. And I've had many clients in that space. I just support them to get to a relaxation.
Okay.
Guided relaxation, pretty basic in a way, but it requires a skill set. And then once they get there, and so like, what are you observing? And I'm amazed at the number of times I'm like, I'm back at the accident scene. And I see myself, but it's not myself. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. And then it's just like their own mind, their own body, their own nervous system, everything is like, we need to recover the sense of safety and self. And so this is part of it. And sometimes there's literally a negotiation that happens, or like, so what's happening is like, oh, I want to reconnect with myself. And it's like, well, ask that self if it wants to come back. And there's times where it's like, hell no, that was scary. I'm scared. So you're scared. And it's called a gestalt. You do a little gestalt to hear from the parts. And sometimes a negotiation where the person who is in pain, promises that they've learned from it. They'll be more kind, that they'll be more aware that something good has come from it, whatever it might be. And then in that moment, there is this reintegration and then reorganization. And it's incredible to witness that happen.
Yeah.
And on a smaller scale, that's what happens when we fall off our bike when we're a kid and we have space to reorganize the learning of that experience.
So to put this in context for this conversation, really, if there's a coach that's listening right now, how might they be able to apply this? Because a lot of times in coaching clinics, we learn about tactics and we learn about technical skills, but we don't tap into this kind of stuff as, placing, and you said it too, it also kind of depends on the kid or the person. So the experience is going to be different. And if we have a whole group of people, it's really hard to tap into the individual. So what might a coach be able to learn from what you know in order to make sure that that space is supported around the athlete?
That's a great question. If there's an acute situation, the first thing would be like, it's not about you, don't be projecting your stuff. And that's what happens often when people are like, you're okay. Like, you're projecting that on them. You don't know. And like, let's find out. And so if it's like, are you okay? Even just simply asking that question, are you okay? And then maybe that other level, especially if they're young, is like, are you afraid or are you hurt?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those simple questions. And then what do you need? And this is, it does kind of get in a little bit with like levels of development, because you have to ask a 4-year-old what do they need. What do you, I don't know. So that might be more of your own assessment in your own head of like what do they need. And so having that more quiet in your own mind, like observing what they seem like. Do they need more time? Do they need to hear that they are okay? Like, this is where, if it starts off at first where it's like, are you okay? Let's assess what's going on, and then go from there.
So maybe
Uh,
think about, we'll make it a specific situation that might be easier. So if a kid is into mountain biking,
yeah.
they are on a new path and they fall and they are scared now. So you're trying to develop this athlete, they're trying to go into these different competitions. And now in the back of their mind, going into competition, they may have this fear of like falling on this one bend. What could a coach do in order to help that fear response?
If there, again, it's the relationship with fear,
Yeah.
to then also recognize that if that fear is an important part of our experience,
Okay.
and that you can still perform afraid, that
Okay.
fear is a part of your self just saying, hey, something important is about to happen.
Mm.
Right? That's an element of fear, where it's like, we're about to go down the same path that we did, that we fell, that hurt, and how can we do this? I have an example with a Paralympic athlete. We're in the States and snowing like crazy, and we're at the top, and they're about to go as a training run, and they looked different to me, and I was new with this team and new in my career, really, and I was just like, what is going on? And this is an element with coaches as well, or anyone, where one of the coaches just said like, okay, focus. We're always focusing. Focus isn't the problem. It's like, what are you focusing on? This
Okay.
is part of my work with mental training, right? Like, if someone's like, okay, focus, is like, you could be focusing on the absolute wrong thing, but you're still focusing. We're always
Right.
focusing.
Yeah. Great question. Yeah.
Right. And so this athlete went down and skied out of the gates, within a couple gates, and in like, for no technical reason. It wasn't like technically they kind of messed up, and so I was like, what's going on? So I went up the lift with them and asked like, what's going on? And they said, last time I was on this mountain, it was snowing like this and I broke my leg.
Okay.
And this is a single leg amputee skier, so they only
Okay.
have one leg, and so
Right.
it's like, that's a bad situation. And so we went up the lift, and it's like, okay, this is big. So now that question of focus is super important. And it's like, great. So that first run, what were you focused on? I was focused on how scared I was. I was focused on how I broke my leg. I was focused on, just mind was all over the place.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you want to do? That is a big deal. Like, this is a re-traumatizing event in a way. And it's like, do you want to take the day off? Do you want to go ski something different and then we can come back? Do you want, like, again, what I was saying earlier, asking, this is an adult. So I'm like, what do
Yeah.
you want?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, no, I know I can ski it. I just need to get in the right state for it. And I was like, okay, great. Well, we had enough time. It was a long lift. So like, so what are you really afraid of? And unpacking the fear. Where do you feel the fear in your body? What do you want to do with it? All these things. And then at the top is like, okay, what focus is going to help you right now? You can ski afraid. You could still be afraid this whole run, but you could ski it well because you have the technical ability. What's going to help you align with that? And usually it is a technical cue. So I said, what are you working on technically? And whatever they said, getting on their edge earlier or whatever, or turning, above the gate, whatever it was. I said, if you can use your mental strength to remain focused on that, you're going to give yourself a chance of really executing this run. You've already agreed that you can do it, technically, physically, that's okay. You know that you want to, the motivation is there. Now let's align your mind with your body and see what happens. And they did a great job. They went to the top. We had some real specific moments at the top where they had space. And they just, in their mind, like Finn's dasha goes straight.
Yeah.
they had this technical cue, and they skied super well, and they went through the whole day. So that was also not only a good training day, but they reorganized their relationship with that mountain. They reorganized their relationship with that previous trauma, And it was a bigger healing day than just a high performance execution day.
Right.
So your example of a mountain biker falling afraid,
Yep.
there's lots of stuff you can do before they even go back to that trail or before they get back on a trail. Like I was saying with people in car accidents, and I mean, this is in an office. We're not back at that car accident place, although I do that sometimes with people. We'll literally go to the road where it happened and do a reorganization there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do some of the stuff with visualizations, with simulating the experience and supporting the athlete, young, old, using imagination. Kids' imaginations are great. And so like, okay, let's imagine you're going down that trail, and can you see it? Yeah. Can you feel it? Yeah. And you're coming up and you get to that corner. And if they, in their imagination, say, oh, I just fell again, or,
Yeah.
oh, I'm scared, or whatever, then you say like, okay, great, press pause in your imagination. Great, press pause in this visualization. And now hit play forward slow motion.
Okay.
And you go slowly through this and and that's when you can say, do you feel okay? And like, yeah, okay, I feel okay. Yeah, I feel okay. And then you're reorganizing that experience to the point where they finish that turn. And if they are given that space within their self to recognize, like, I'm okay, like I am okay, because in that moment they're fine.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, press play for the rest of the run, and how did that go? And they might say, that was great, I feel good, or I'm still scared. And they were like, okay, let's go back to the top of that run, hit play again. And you can use, that's why the mind is so great that way, where you can create these dials. And especially with anyone, but kids, you can be like, okay, there's a little like triangle play icon, and then like the fast forward, slow-mo, all these things. They're like, you are in control.
Nice.
You can hit whatever speed you need. You can hit pause, you can hit stop if you're like, it's too much, and then you can go back to it. So that technique is a really great one that anyone can really use. Minding the projection, minding that you're projecting onto the person, give them space, trust that they can reorganize, they can do this. With kids, more of that imagination, more of that openness to their own abilities. And so that's an example of one thing you do. And one more piece on if it's a group and giving space. So again, the National Biathlon team, a lot of teams I work with, we have a post-performance protocol.
Okay.
And the post-performance protocol is for reorganizing the event, whatever happened, and realigning your nervous system. And it's through breathing techniques and body positions and a couple mindfulness things, where we use parasympathetic triggers. That 5-7 minute post-performance protocol. And it's to give space for them to have this debrief. What went well? What didn't go well? What am I going to do next time?
Mm-hmm.
And literally in the body. So the body reorganizes. And that's something that coaches could implement. For the reason I created it first was for physical recovery.
Yeah.
Right? Because you put in a huge training block. One of the things that really separates high performers is the training and recovery, right?
Yep.
And so if they're already recovering before they leave the field of play, because they've shifted literally their nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic,
mm-hmm.
then they're going to recover quicker, learn lessons, and go. But that's a great way. Also, we don't know, maybe someone had a mini trauma in that training practice for whatever reason. Maybe someone has something going on personally. But if in sport, whatever the sport, this is built into the daily routine, then we're giving the person an opportunity in their life to have this reorganization, reassessment, and then maybe they touch on something and then they want to communicate it, where it's like, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm recognizing that, or they're doing great and they keep doing great. But it's a way that you can really work with a lot of people that makes it more systematic and more structured. And so you don't have to like point anyone out or, anything like that.
Yeah, great tip there, because switching from that sympathetic to parasympathetic. So if anybody doesn't know what that means, when you're performing, you're in this state of fight or flight. And then when you are relaxing, and then you need to even recover in the sense of getting in your nutrition, we have to switch to parasympathetic in order to absorb all the nutrients that we need and everything else that our body needs to recover. And so what John just pointed out is huge. So even just a simple breath work after performance can change that nervous system. And so a lot of things that what is coming up now is there was a joke about do I do breath work with my athletes, well, they're breathing all the time and they're alive. So yes, I'm doing my breath work, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure that we have this purpose going into whatever we're doing. And what John said is really key. It's just like, just incorporate this every single time. So, like after a session, after you're done, take a couple thoughtful breaths, mindful breaths, and then change that nervous system. Would you agree with that?
100%. And one of the messages that can be tricky is for people for performers at any level to recognize that recovery, that slowness is training.
Okay.
People will be like, oh, my training program is this. And there's some people really do bring in the recovery as their training. So I'm working with a runner who has a 30-minute run as part of their, doing some speed work or something like that. And if they're training, if they say like, I've got a 30-minute training day today, it's like, no, you don't. You've got the recovery, and that is however long is going to be needed for it, or whatever protocols you're using.
Right.
And that is training, that is high performance. And some people still are very resistant to relaxation, to whether that's napping, meditation, breath work, just going for a slow walk, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be long, but it has to be effective. Like, you actually have to shift your nervous system, because otherwise, if you just go from the next to the next to the next,
yeah,
then you're in a state of survival all the time. You have all sorts of chemicals that are being pumped into your body that, from an animal standpoint, is saying like, we're under threat, where you're like, not. And so the other part about it is, when you train your nervous system and you can get really relaxed, your nervous system is more primed to be able to go really intense. You actually create that bandwidth and that depth of your nervous system. But if you stay in a pretty high state of arousal, or just kind of that arousal state, often your nervous system gets really narrow. That range isn't that big.
Okay.
So absolutely. And coaches, especially if that's a philosophy coaches can pass on to their athletes at any level, that recovery is important, that there's lots of ways of doing it, and that the best in the world are doing this. If you have someone who's resistant to it, and like, who's your favorite, whoever, athlete, performer, and they're like, oh, so-and-so, I can almost guarantee you that person is using these techniques and probably doing it at a world-class level, which is why they're the best at what they do.
Right. Yeah. It's not just this hocus pocus stuff that you hear about, but can't apply. And how cool is that to teach that to a kid that's super young and they can use this lifelong? It's not even just for sport. It's for all kinds of things. Like, you get stressed out because you're in traffic, or you get stressed out because your boss is mad at you, or whatever it is. So having these tools is super valuable. Okay. We've been talking a lot, and I love it. And I will keep going for as long as possible, but okay, but we got to transition.
Stay tuned to what we transition to. John had a lot to share, and rather than editing, I decided to extend. Up next, John unpacks more about risk, wonder, and how to perform when you feel like an avalanche could bury you. Literally, John prepares for being buried by avalanches. More in part 2 with John Coleman.